Hello, Portuguese Heritage Month, everybody. Ta-da!
I'm proud to welcome.
So now we're following a rather sad piece with some humor. Our last reader, also Fed member, Tony Correia, he writes a monthly humor column, Queen's Logic, for Extra West. His essays have been published in the Globe and Mail and Subterranean Magazine. In May, Tony won Extra West's Jane Rule's Memorial Award for Writer of the Year. He'll be reading from Work in Progress, a memoir called Food Sluts at Dawn Penny's Cafe. Tony?
It's so hard to come up after that. This is about parents as well. This is from the early part of a memoir that I'm working on, and this is about how I told my parents I was moving to Vancouver. It's called Low Expectations. In my haste to tell my friends, ex-lovers, and employer that I was blowing the popsicle stand that is Toronto, I neglected to mention it to the two people who mattered most, my parents. Mom and Dad were 47 when they had me. 4 years before, they had immigrated to Brampton, Ontario from the Azores. It goes without saying they assumed menopause was the reason my mother missed her period, nor should it need mentioning they were Catholic. Often I had wondered what occasion had sparked the lovemaking that conceived me. My mother's birthday, or a cold winter's night perhaps. Whatever it was, even at the age of 19, I was assured that I would still be able to get erect by my mid to late 40s. I came not only as a complete surprise to my parents, but as a mystery to them as well. They were well into their 50s as I was maturing in the 1970s. They had never had to compete with the television for my siblings' affection and devotion. While my brothers and sisters cleaned the house, manicured the lawn, paid rent, and served the Lord, I was busy worshiping in the house of JJ, Fonzie, Barbarino, and Mork from Mork, respectively. I posed a completely different set of challenges to my parents, most of which they chose to ignore. Ours was a family of low expectations. Everything we owned, the house, the station wagon, the black and white television my father repaired well into the 80s, was a far cry better than what my family had left behind in the Azores. My brothers and sisters had not known what indoor plumbing was until I moved to Brampton, much less eating a meal without killing it first. They were not expected to become anything more than laborers, mechanics, and secretaries, to get married, buy a house, not practice birth control, and raise a large family. It was assumed that since I was the only native Canadian, I would be the one to get the degree, to never see the inside of a factory, to become what my father always expected me to be, a civil servant. As if the culture clash and generations gap weren't divisive enough, my parents and I literally did not speak the same language. I simply refused to learn Portuguese. Like arithmetic, I did not see the real-world implications. My parents, for their part, were either too busy or too tired from raising a family to learn English. Why should they when they had 7 translators at their disposal? You would think that between the three of us, we would learn our respective languages through osmosis, but we were too immersed in our own little worlds, mine in front of the TV and theirs at Jesus' feet, to pay much attention to what the other camp was doing. Considering they had 8 kids, my parents had a pretty easy time of raising us. Neither myself nor my siblings had been arrested, knocked up, or impregnated anyone, nor had we become alcoholics or drug addicts. There was a simple reason for that. We lived in mortal fear of my father's temper. Though he never beat us and rarely raised his voice, my mother was constantly reminding us that, like God's wrath, the potential existed. If we were being too loud or stayed out too late, my mother would admonish us with one of her looks, gesturing with her eyebrows in my father's direction even when he wasn't there, like some dormant evil waiting to substantiate. It was for that very reason my brothers and sisters and I procrastinated telling my parents anything of any importance until it was absolutely necessary, or not at all. It broke my mother's heart when she and my father came back from a summer in Portugal to discover I had moved out of the house. As with family policy, I alluded to finding my own apartment after high school, but never actually confirmed anything one way or the other until it was already too late. They had assumed I would stay put. I could easily commute to theater school, but I had already made up my mind to leave for reasons we all knew but never discussed. Maybe that's why Mom kept such a close eye on me in school. She was afraid that if I found out there were others like me, I would fly the coop, and I did. Mom had every reason to be concerned. Despite my protests to the contrary, I did everything she accused me of doing in high school. The year before, I'd come out to 2 of my closest friends in the parking lot of the McDonald's where I worked. I had known Brad since kindergarten. He perpetrated the bare ass incident my mother walked in on. Gordon and I found each other while working on the school paper. We'd been dancing around our sexuality for weeks, but it was Brad who finally pushed us out of the closet and took us to our first gay bar. You just can't go back to towing the line after something like that. Dad was rummaging through his gardening tools when I walked up the driveway. "Hi, Bansu," I said to my father when I saw him, and kissed him on the cheek. This was custom in our family. He blessed me back, averting his eyes. It was as if he knew something was up, like he'd been waiting for me. "Where's Mom?" I said, not like I had to ask. "In the basement." He answered in Portuguese, "Doing her knitting." "Okay, I'll go and say hello." "Okay," he replied, his back already to me. Mom rarely left the basement unless it was to go to bed, Kmart, or to church. Although there was a couch in the basement, she preferred to soothe her varicose veins stretched out on the cool floor. Mom was as compulsive about her knitting as she was about her letter writing. Once she was in the zone, she rarely raised her eyes above her needles unless there was a telenovela on TV. "My Vansu," I said, ere kissing her cheek to avoid having my eye poked out by a needle. Since it's hard to make small talk to someone you don't speak the same language, I decided just to get it over with. "I need to tell you something," I said and wrote in Portuguese. The room was silent except for the clicking of her needles. "I'm moving to Vancouver," I said. Only her eyebrows betrayed her, raising ever so slightly, like she had just caught the whiff of her own fart. "When?" she asked. "In 2 weeks." Her nose started to turn red, and I thought she was going to cry, and that made me want to cry. "It's only for 6 months," I heard myself say. She saw through my lie and shrugged her shoulders. "There's nothing I can do to stop you," she said, her eyes never leaving her knitting. "Have you told your father?" "Not yet. You should." Mom was exactly as I found her when I left to go tell my father. It was strange to me that a woman who overreacted to just about everything sat completely passive after hearing her son is moving across the country. I like to think that she fell apart as soon as I was out of sight, but something tells me she kept on knitting, like nothing had happened. Dad, on the other hand, reacted exactly as I anticipated. My career as a waiter began at the age of 6 when I was expected to get my father a Labatt's Blue from the fridge when he came home from work. It was also my job to run to the store and get him his cigarettes. Being my father's gopher was one of the few responsibilities he entrusted me with. I was not allowed to use the lawnmower or the snowblower, and rarer still, the family car. It was from him that I learned I ruined everything I touched. Dad was by now working in his rose garden. Though Brampton looks nothing like Tatooine from Star Wars, there was something about the way the sun was setting that reminded me of when Luke Skywalker asked his Uncle Owen if he could leave for the Space Academy a year early. We were up against the same odds as far as I was concerned. "Hey, Dad," I said, "I need to talk to you about something." He stood up with a sigh and lit a cigarette. "I've decided to move to Vancouver." "Vancouver," he said, his temper flaring. "What about school?" "Dad, I haven't been in school for almost a year." "Why Vancouver? What's wrong with Toronto?" "Nothing. I need change." "Change," he spat. This was the last person to be having a conversation about change with. He hadn't pushed a broom in years and he was still wearing his janitor pants. "I didn't get a vacation, Tony," he said. It was the first time I ever heard his resentment at having to care for his children. Not once had I considered he had dreams of his own. At the same time, it really insulted me that he didn't think what I did was work. "This isn't a vacation. You moved to Canada for a better life. I moved to Vancouver for the same reason." "Do you have a job?" he asked, calming down. "Not yet." "Some place to stay?" "No." Dad shook his head and inhaled half his cigarette in one breath, sighing the smoke back out. "Tony," he said, "one of these days you're going to want a house and a car, and you can't do that if you keep moving around." "A house? A car? What did I need with a house? As for a car, I had let my license expire after I moved to Toronto. It just went to show how much my father didn't understand me." "When are you going?" "In 2 weeks." I watched my dad crumple his lit cigarette butt between his thumb and forefinger. "I can't stop you," he said, echoing my mother. It was like they had rehearsed this moment. "Please, remember, you can't do 50% of the job, and go to church on Sundays." I leaned over to hug him, but he sat there motionless, like my mother, but without the needles. Just once, I wished they could be happy for me, encourage me, or agree with me. I may as well have told them I was gay while I was at it. In some ways, I had.